Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're all doing well. Happy Friday. It is mega windy here in the north of England. It's so windy today. It's warm, but it's windy. I like wind. It's good. All right. That's my weather report for this morning. Well, this afternoon, just gone 12:30 here in the UK. I'm guessing it's going to be a very early morning for most people if you're in this chat live. But if you're not, you can always catch it on the replay. I've got a little bit earlier than I normally do when I do live streams because I got stuff to do this afternoon. So let's talk about the Idaho 4 case and Brian Kohberger. Now, look, this case does have a lot of really strong opinions. Oh, thank you, Purple AJ, for gifting 5 memberships. We've got Heather So, Sirius Black, Sue, Jack, and certainly Gail. Thank you so much, Purple AJ, and welcome. If you've never been a member before, go and check out the members area. We've got all sorts of stuff in there. Bunch of stuff. All right. So, yeah, this case, it's one of those cases. You know, it's got so much public attention over the last almost 2.5 years. And, you know, people are pretty now entrenched in their camp. You know, you're either a pro-burger, or you're bedded in reality. And there's plenty of people actually, though, still on the fence, still waiting for the trial. And look, I think they've got the man. I've been up front from the beginning. I think they've got the man. And I haven't seen anything that has changed my mind. If stuff starts coming out that changes my mind, you better believe I'll change my mind. Because I don't get entrenched. I float along the top of the trenches. Anyway, we're going to talk about, there's a whole bunch of court filings that have come out. And I just want to talk about 2 issues because it'd just take too long to go through every single filing. So I'm not going to do that. Michelle is in rare form today. Oh, well, yeah. It's Friday. Got the Friday feeling. So, look, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you believe. As long as you're respectful in the chat, I welcome all opinions. You just need to be respectful. If you're an obvious troll, then you will be asked to leave, and I'll get snarky with you. But, you know, look, if you believe he's innocent, then put your arguments forward as to why you believe he's innocent. Pro burger or a no burger. It's just a complete nothing burger. He's a nothing burger. But you've got to give his defense 10 out of 10 for effort. I mean, they're working really hard. But Ann Taylor, she's slick. She is. She's very slick. But she's not quite slick enough. I've got her card marked. I know exactly what she's playing at. I think we can all gather what she's playing at. She gives herself away. Way too many times for it to be a coincidence, in my opinion. And of course, all of this is my opinion. So I'm going to read through some of the court filings. I'm going to focus on the neuro stuff, the MRI, which shows that Brian Kohberger is brain disordered. He's got a very small brain in several key regions. So there's a neuroscientist who's weighed in, which I find really, really interesting. I'm also going to talk about the text messages. Look, I think just about everybody who's covering this case has gone with the text messages between Bethany and Dylan. And someone in my comments yesterday said to me, are you still going to be defending Bethany and Dylan? Now, you know, given this like shocking messages that have come out. And I hadn't read that filing at the time. I read that comment. So I thought, oh, challenge accepted. Challenge accepted. And look, the filing is just, it's a nothing burger. What's so like got people up in arms? I don't understand. I don't understand. Anyhow, we'll do that first, and then we'll do the stuff that I find interesting. Because I just don't find the text messages that interesting, to be honest. And we're not even seeing all of them. We're not seeing the whole thing. So, you know, we're trying to put meaning into something that we've got like 10% of the information. So how can you put meaning into something when you've got so little of the actual information? I don't know. Let's see who's in the house. We've got Peggy Ann. Welcome back. You've been away and now you're back. Welcome. Angie baby, Susan, Angela, Melissa, Terry, Lisa. Good morning from a chilly Central Florida. Chilly and Florida are not two words you often see together in a sentence. Who else we got? Sirius Black, CW. Good afternoon to you. We've got Cold-Hearted Biatch. We got Mike, Babe, Tweety Lynn, Thunder Horse, Jennifer, Shazza, Jack, Kimberly, Heather Feather, Rambling Rome, Sue. Hello, everybody. All right. Okay, so this is Brian Creekberger in his shower. Just 6 hours after the murders. This is Brian looking as relaxed and as happy as I've ever seen him. I don't think I've ever seen a photo of Kohberger where he's actually smiling. Maybe some kind of weird grimace, but no, but he actually looks relaxed. And that's a problem, because this is just 6 hours after the murders. And you might say, well, of course he's relaxed, because he's just committed a quadruple homicide. So he feels, you know, job's a good one. I pulled it off. You know, he's got this, you know, he's high on life and death. You know, he's washed all the blood off his hands now, and he can just relax, knowing that he's pulled it off. Or you could say, well, he has absolutely no idea that these murders have even happened. This is 10:31 a.m. The 911 hadn't even been called yet. Why shouldn't he be relaxed? He's just got out of his shower. He's got a nice shirt on. Why shouldn't he be relaxed? He's completely innocent. He's completely oblivious to everything that's going to come. Okay, you can. All right, I'll give you that. Okay, so we've had a whole bunch of filings here. Let me just make this screen a bit bigger for you. All right, we've had a whole bunch of filings. So a couple of weeks ago, there was a whole bunch of filings. And then the majority of these are now the replies. So because there was a whole flurry of filings 2 weeks ago, now we've got all the replies. So it's a lot. And yeah, I've read these now. So we're going to start with the text messages. And it's a nothing burger. I just don't see it. I don't see what you guys see, because we don't have the information that we need to make the assessment as to whether Dylan or Bethany were doing anything shady. We don't know what they were saying, because we don't have all the text messages. We don't have the content of the phone calls. We don't have the messages that they may or may not have been sending on various social media platforms. So how can you make an assessment as to how suspect this makes Dylan and Bethany sound? Anyway, the filing is about whether the text messages should be allowed in to the trial at all under the hearsay rule, and the state want them included and actually got them accepted under Judge as a exception to hearsay. I didn't realize that text messages were that controversial, because text messages frequently get read out in court cases, frequently. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's because they want, let's say, for example, a police officer to read them out or someone else to read them out, and therefore it kind of does mean it's hearsay. If you've got Dylan or Bethany on the stand and you want them to actually discuss the content of what was being said, yeah, that's hearsay. But just the text messages themselves, I don't really understand how that's a problem. And seemingly Judge didn't think it was a problem, and he was allowing the state to include the text messages. But now we've got a new judge. We've got Judge Hippler. The defense are having another go to try and get these text messages thrown out. And look, if they were so suspect, if they were so bad for Bethany and Dylan, wouldn't the defense want to keep them, to raise reasonable doubt in the jury's minds? Wouldn't that help their case? I don't know. Anyway, Brian C. Kohberger, buying through his attorney's record, objects to the state's motion in limine to admit text messaging as requested in its motion. Mr. Kohberger's objection is grounded in his constitutional rights to a fair trial, due process, and confrontation of evidence as guaranteed to him by the 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, Articles 1, Section 13 of the Idaho Constitution. The state is seeking a broad scope of cell phone records for two stated purposes. One, to establish a timeline, and the other is for the truth of the statements contained in the record. Well, okay, now a lot of people who think that these text messages between Bethany and Dylan are suspect, it's not to do with the content, it's to do with the timeline. So, okay. The span of time the state seeks to encompass is about 10 hours. The state indicates the initial text is the beginning of the time frame at 2:10 a.m. and the text is not offered for the truth of the matter. Similarly, at the end of the time frame is a text from the University of Idaho at 1:04 p.m. The state grounds its request in the rules of evidence and a previous decision by Judge. So if they're just using these text messages or, various different communications, because this is not just about text messages. If it's all just to establish a timeline, then there's no hearsay problem. There's no hearsay component to it, is there? It's like, all right, so we've got this text message at this time, and then we've got the University of Idaho at 1:04 p.m. sending a message out. Okay. You're just bookending the period of time that the state want to consider. And then there's that short period of time right in the middle of all of this where 4 innocent people got murdered in their beds. So the state relies on Judge's conclusion in Mr. Kohberger's challenge to the grand jury indictment. However, that decision does not bind this court. Judge Hippler ain't going to like this. He ain't going to like this. The law of the case doctrine applies. Well, okay, whatever. Okay. The state seeks admission of certain texts for the truth of the matter asserted as exceptions to the rule of hearsay. All right, so timeline, fine. Doesn't even bring in hearsay, saying this happened at this time, this happened at this time, this happened at this time. And if you're using phone communications and so on as part of that, there's no hearsay problem. However, if they're using the messages as statements of truth for the truth of the matter, then I guess it depends how they're used. It depends who's on the stand as to how much of a hearsay issue it could be. Anyhow, Judge accepted that these text messages between Bethany and Dylan were exceptions to hearsay due to excited utterances. They're considered, if you make excited utterances. I love how that's a legal term. I do. Excited utterance. So if you were startled, or if you said something out of surprise or shock, or it was just a spontaneous reaction, apparently that's an exception to hearsay. And then present sense impression. Okay. So factors of trustworthiness and necessity play a large role in the trial court's decision whether to admit a declarant's expression of his state of mind or whether to exclude it under Idaho Rules of Evidence 403, as well as the decision whether to admit or exclude. Both exceptions require the statement to be contemporaneous with the event and be spontaneous without time for reflection. So the defense has a big point here. If the only reason why Judge accepted these text messages for as exceptions to hearsay because they are present sense impression, which is like at the time, well, these text messages weren't at the time. They were across numerous hours. But again, I can't see any issue with them being used as timeline. So I do think that this will get rejected. I do think that the judge will deny this. I'd be very surprised if he grants this for the defense. So I think we will see these text messages in whatever form at the trial. But let's go to these. All right, so the state provided a select portion of the phone records from Bethany and Dylan and some text messages in their filing from a couple of weeks back. The defense now wants to provide a fuller, but not exhaustive. This is very important, that even though we've got more detail here, it's not exhaustive. So if you're thinking that this is suspect in some way, whether it's to do with the timings or whether it's to do with what's being said, then you don't have the full story. You absolutely don't have the full story, because you've got a lot of phone calls and stuff here, unanswered calls, and you've got in the morning they're browsing social media, so you don't know what they're doing on social media. You know, Dylan spends quite a bit of time on Instagram, so what's she doing? Is she just browsing like people's profiles, or is she messaging people? We don't know. That's why you can't make an assessment as to how suspect this is. This is why I think this is just a big nothing burger, because you don't have enough information to be able to say one way or another as to whether this puts Bethany and Dylan in the firing line of, potential suspects. You just don't have the information. All right, so 210, there's this Uber driver. So this is when the state want the timeline to begin. So this is the first bookend, and then the 1:04 p.m. Message from the University of Idaho, that's the other bookend. Again, I don't see any problem using any of this as timeline. So that's with the Uber driver. And then Maddie calls Bethany. So this is 2:53. Now, stuff was going on at 2:53 between Maddie and Kaylee. They were trying to get in touch with Jack, Kaylee's ex, around this time. So why Maddie called Bethany, who knows? Was it something to do with, you know, like, you call Jack, he's not answering, can you call Jack? We don't know. We don't know. At 3:51, Dylan creates a new contact in her phone. Okay. And then this is after the murders. So this will be shortly after Dylan sees the man with the bushy eyebrows and the ski mask. So 4:19, Bethany calls Dylan. 4:20. We've got all in the same minute. So Dylan calls Anna, Kaylee, and Bethany, who picks up for 41 seconds. So is that Bethany? Is that Dylan just returning Bethany's call? Like, we don't know whether they spoke at 4:19. Again, we don't know. This is why this is just a massive nothing burger. There's no context whatsoever. We know that Xana and Kaylee didn't reply because they were already dead. But did Bethany call Dylan for some other reason? Did Bethany hear noises and she called Dylan? Like, if Bethany's on the, you know, the bottom floor, maybe she heard noises and she thought, well, I'll call Dylan because she's upstairs. We don't know. We don't know. All right. So then Bethany starts calling. They're all calling. So we've got call Xana, Maddie, Ethan. Right, let's give Ethan a try. Let's see if Ethan's here. 4:22. No one's answering. I'm really confused right now. And then to Kaylee. Kaylee, what's going on? So we saw these from the previous filing from the start. Cassie Marie, welcome to Secret Agents. I think you're a rejoin. Yeah, you're a rejoiner. Thanks for rejoining. Then we've got a message on Snapchat. Then we've got Bethany to Dylan. Yeah, dude. WTF. So we got the context to this now. Xana was wearing all black. So if Dylan rang Bethany and said, I've just seen some creepy dude wearing black, well, maybe Bethany's had a think about it and thought, well, maybe it was Xana because Xana was wearing black. Who knows? With no context. I'm freaking out. No, it's like a ski mask. Okay. Right, we've seen these before. So, not kidding. I'm so freaked out. So am I. Phone is going to die. Come to my room. Run down here. So we're all within, you know, a few minutes. We're all within like 5 minutes. All this is happening within 5 minutes between 4:19 and 4:24 into 4:25. 4:27. So we don't know who she called. We don't know who she messaged. Still going. Kaylee, Xana, Maddie, Kaylee. They're still going. So they're obviously really concerned. Really concerned. So this doesn't help the defense at all. If this helped the defense, there'd be absolutely no way that Ann Taylor would be trying to get these disallowed. If these were truly suspicious, she'd want to keep these in. She wouldn't give a shit. She wouldn't give a rat's ass whether these were hearsay. She'd want them in because they help her case. So the defense obviously don't think there's anything too suspicious behind all this stuff. honestly. So they're still going. And then there's nothing for 3 hours. So you have to assume that they're asleep for 3 hours there almost. So it seems that Bethany wakes up first, calls her dad again, calls another number, no idea who, calls home, calls mom. And then dad obviously gets up and calls Bethany. So we don't know the context of the conversation. Again, massive nothing burger. Then we've got Dylan on Instagram for nearly 2 hours. So is she messaging people, like saying, you know, this creepy thing happened last night, or is she having a whole bunch of conversations? What's she doing? We don't know. And then Bethany takes photos. We've no idea whether they're suspicious photos. Are they suspicious photos? Well, we've no idea. But I tell you who does know, the police. The police will know what those photos were. And way back, right in the first week, they said that the surviving roommates were not suspects or persons of interest. They were cleared. They were cleared like early doors. So whatever photos Bethany took, they were not suspicious photos. Okay, so we got Bethany's mother texting her. And then we've got more social media. Lots of social media. And then we start to get like the people who kind of came to the house. So we've got more TikTok. I mean, look, what's weird about this? Like, what's weird about this? You've got kind of partly perfectly normal social media activity on a Sunday morning, juxtaposed with a bunch of frantic calling and texting and stuff. And we don't know any of the context. So it keeps going. Text. Don't know what they're saying, so can't comment. No idea. And then at 11:56, Bethany calls 911. I thought Dylan was the first voice on 911. So all of you who said, no, that's Bethany, you were right. I thought it was Dylan, but you were right. Riley's Nanny, thank you for the $4.99. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Michelle said 3 hours, but true. Yeah, there's a 3 hour period between, well, almost 3 hours, between 4:37 and 7:30, where there's no activity at all. Unless there was, and it's just not been included here. But that seems to be the point where Bethany seems to be asleep for 3 hours there. And then she gets up and calls her dad. Dylan, it's like another half hour before you see Dylan. So they've slept for 3 hours, 3.5 hours. So Bethany slept for 3 hours, maybe. And Dylan, maybe 3.5. Assuming that they, you know, as soon as they woke up, Bethany called her dad and Dylan went on Instagram. They may not have been asleep. We don't know. We've no idea. But you could kind of assume that all activity ceases. You could kind of assume that maybe they did go to sleep and then they woke up 3 hours later. Normal stuff happened. And then some frantic texting and worry. We don't know. It's just a nothing burger. Total nothing burger. So Mr. Kohberger urges the court to view the state's request with consideration of the complete picture. The state has asked the court to look at a timeline, and Mr. Kohberger urges the court to look at everything that occurred during the timeline. The state's motion should be denied. Well, of course, the whole trial is about what happened during the timeline. This is insane. is insane. Let's read this anyway. The state has selected text messaging as excited utterances and present sense impression. The totality of circumstances defeat the state's request. Bethany and Dylan texted each other a handful of times, and then they were in the same bedroom. They were together with the ability to talk to each other. They were not asleep for 8 hours. No, they weren't. They absolutely weren't. They were asleep maybe 3 hours. That's assuming that the period when there was no activity at all, they were actually asleep. They may have been awake the whole time. They may have been chatting the whole time. But you kind of have to assume that maybe they did go to sleep at some point. But they definitely did not sleep for 8 hours. Absolutely not. They did not. They did not. And I don't think we could say that all of these are excited utterances. Present sense impression. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But including these for timeline, I don't see why the defense would have a problem with it. But obviously they do. So for whatever reason, they don't think that these are suspicious, or else they wouldn't be making this argument, would they? Kimberly, thank you for the $20. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. All right. The message is the state seeks admission. All right. So that's all about hearsay. Okay. Second grouping of messages, the state claims fit within the exception to hearsay rule of those from DM and her roommate starting at 10:23, 6 hours later. All right. Look, I think Judge Hippler will deny this. I honestly do. I'd be surprised, very surprised, if he allows the defense to get these thrown out. I just don't see them as that important. There's so many other ways that the timeline can be clarified. Anyhow, I'm now moving over to the stuff that you might find less interesting, but I find really interesting, and that's the neuro stuff. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple of short states motions. So these are all around the same kind of issue to do with Brian Kohberger's health status or mental health status, or how his health problems or diagnoses can influence the trial. The big one, of course, is the one from the defense, but I just want to include these two. This one I found funny. So the defense 2 weeks ago put a motion in limine in to get the words psychopath and sociopath excluded from the trial. As if the state's going to come along and say to the jury, this man here is a psychopath. Of course they're not. Of course they're not. So this is the state's response. All right. Defendant asked this court to exclude the use of the words psychopath and sociopath during the trial. The state has no plans to use the words psychopath or sociopath during the trial based on the current record. Why would they want to? But this could end up biting. This could end up biting Ann Taylor on the ass. Ann Taylor's slick, but she's not that slick. She's not as... I think Ann Taylor is one of those people who maybe, I don't know the woman, right? But it's my opinion, maybe thinks she's a little bit brighter than she actually is. Because she's really obvious and she shoots herself in the foot. She's done it more than once. And this is potentially another time where she's done this, where it could bite her in the butt. The state notes, however, the defense recently put defendants' mental health at issue. Motion to strike death penalty regarding autism spectrum disorder. As a result, look, I did I do 2 videos on this? I remember doing one sitting with Billy, the Vizsla. I think I may have covered it in a live as well, or at least mentioned it in a live, that autism is not a mental health diagnosis. Autistic spectrum disorder is a neurodevelopmental difference. I don't even like the term autism and disorder in the same name. It's a difference. Now, look, if you're very, very severely autistic, then of course you're going to be considered disordered because you can't function normally. But for somebody like Kohberger, who has a diagnosis of autism, it's not a mental health disorder. In fact, I was furious at the defense. Furious I was, because they were constantly saying that Brian Kohberger had a mental defect, and then using the term mental defect and autism in the same sentence. And I know a lot of you were offended by the words that the defense were using, and rightly so. I was furious. So they've completely changed their tune now. They've completely changed. So I'm glad about that. Maybe they've realized they were wrong, or maybe they've realized that actually we've got a better line of, potential line of testimony here to say Kohberger has got a physical problem, not a mental problem. Okay. All right. And also, a lot of people came at me saying, because what I said was, look, the way that Anne Taylor has phrased the motions regarding autism, so the round of filings that were done 2 weeks ago, she has made Brian Kohberger sound guilty. She has shot herself in the foot. She's admitted he's guilty. Now, a lot of you came back to me and said, yeah, but she hasn't, because this is all about the guilt phase, not the... this is not about the guilt phase. This is about the punishment phase, because this is a death penalty case. So you've got the guilt phase, which is the trial. If he's convicted, so found guilty, then it's down to whether or not he gets the death penalty. So the motion to strike the death penalty and all the stuff that she wrote about mental defects and stuff, that's all about the punishment phase. That's to get the death penalty off the table. But no, because some of the way that she worded those filings from a couple of weeks ago, she was talking about the death penalty. Yes, she was. But there was like things seeping in, the way she was wording things, thinking that she was slick, bringing it in about the guilt phase. It wasn't just about the punishment phase. Go and read the words that she said. And it appears that the defense have been picked up on by the state, who've also picked up on this problem. All right. So as a result, the state may move to have defendant examined by its own expert. So I'm actually surprised that the state hasn't given Kohberger a psych eval. Maybe they didn't think he'd need it. Maybe they just, it wasn't something, up to recently, the defense haven't been talking about Kohberger's health or mental status or anything like that. It's not like this is an insanity case. So Anne Taylor bringing this stuff up, bringing up the autism, bringing up the mental defect, bringing up we don't want the prosecution using the term psychopath or sociopath, even though they got no intention of doing so. has all bitten her in the butt. And I said 2 weeks ago, I said, she's gonna, this is not good. This is a really, really bad move for the defense. Really bad move. She's admitted his guilt. But beyond that, she's now opened Brian Kohberger up to the state's own psych eval. So what if the state get a psych eval and they say, well, no, we don't think he's autistic. We think he's a psychopath. How about that? What are they going to do then? It's going to be a battle of the experts in a way that the defense absolutely cannot win. Absolutely cannot win. If such an examination takes place and reveals any additional information about defendant's mental health, or the defense asserts additional information regarding defendant's mental health, the state reserves the right to use that information to the extent it is relevant and admissible on the issues of guilt or punishment. They've picked up on what Ann Taylor was doing in saying, oh, this is to strike the death penalty. No. Yes, she was. It's an attempt to get the death penalty stricken in the event of a conviction. But the way that those motions were worded, she's talking about the guilt phase. She thinks she's slick, and she isn't. Another thing that I talked about back then, and I said there is no way that Brian Kohberger being diagnosed with a mental defect, good Lord, whether that's depression, anxiety, or autism, which is not a mental health problem anyhow, dear God, those are not sufficient to strike the death penalty. They are not, because he's not insane. Depression doesn't mean you're insane. Anxiety doesn't mean you're insane. Autism doesn't mean you're insane. And in Idaho, it seems that they have got quite a narrow view on this, as the state explains in this motion here. We're only going to read part of this because it's 13 pages long. So, okay. So this is responding to the defendant's motion to strike the death penalty on account of his alleged diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. Defendant argues that it would violate the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment to impose a sentence of death because he has ASD. His argument fails on multiple independent reasons. For starters, and I think this is all we need to know, honestly. For starters, defendant arguments contradicts both US Supreme Court and Idaho Supreme Court precedent. The only mental disability that precludes imposition of the death penalty is intellectual disability. That's it. That's all. So he's not insane, so you can't impose some form of insanity defense. And nor do his conditions, however many there are, none of them constitute an intellectual disability or a learning disability. They do not. So, no. So, failed to prove requisite national consensus to support his claim. A critical view of that consensus is the actions of state legislators in addressing the punishment defendant now claims is prohibited under the Eighth Amendment. It's like something like 1 in 60 odd people is now diagnosed with autism of some kind, like some way on the autism spectrum. It's like 1 in 60 something people. So that would be a lot of people that you'd be letting off. So no. So Idaho law only prohibits the death penalty for a mentally disabled person when the elements of Idaho Code 19251-5A are proven and the defendant has failed to do so. He is not right. This is what an intellectual disability is defined as. The Idaho Supreme Court has read the statutory definition of mentally retarded. Are we really using that term? Are we really using that term in legal filings or in law? Are we? Okay. To require proof of 3 elements: an intelligence quotient, IQ, of 70 or below, significant limitations in adaptive functioning in at least 2 of the 10 areas listed, whatever they are, and the onset of the offender's IQ of 70 or below and the onset of his or her significant limitations in adaptive functioning must both have occurred before the offender turned 18. So very narrow. So Idaho have got a very narrow view of what is considered mentally challenged or mentally defective, to use Ann Taylor's words. So Brian Kohberger has an IQ of 119, as we will see. I don't know if it's in this filing or the defense's filing. But Brian Kohberger allegedly has an IQ of 119. So that's above average IQ. So absolutely not suffering from an intellectual disability. You could have autism, you could have any number of different conditions, and you still do not get let off the death penalty because Idaho have got a narrow view of what is constituting mentally defective, to use Ann Taylor's word. And also, there's no question of insanity, so we don't even have to have that conversation. We don't even have to have that conversation yet. Ann Taylor's not tried that one yet. Oh, he was insane. Let's do that one now. All right, so courts in other jurisdictions have also had similar thoughts here. Okay. I think that's probably about all we need to read from this. Fails because he cannot show evolving standards of decency prohibit the death penalty for individuals with ASD. Thank you, Joanne, for the $20. That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. Okay, see if there's anything of interest in here. You can go and read these all yourself if you want. I've put the link to the court filings, all of it, in the description box. So court should reject defendant's attempt to group together all individuals with any form of ASD for purposes of determining. Again, that's exactly what I said. Like autism, it's a very, very, very broad spectrum. From highly, highly disordered, like non-verbal, just completely, unable to communicate with the world at one end. And then you've got what used to be called Asperger's syndrome at the other end, which is high functioning. Often the only kind of problem is with things like social connection, things like that. Like expressing emotion or social connection with others, like talking to other people. They can come across as socially awkward. And that can create things like anxiety, depression, etc. But those are comorbid. They're not part of the autism, but they're comorbid to it because of the issues that you might have with things like, you might have chronic loneliness. You might really want friends but can't get them. That kind of thing that can create a lot of issues. But it doesn't influence how intelligent you are. It doesn't influence how functional you are in any other way in the world other than to do with social connection. So, no, to say we've got to not give him the death penalty because he's autistic is ridiculous. Absolutely, completely ridiculous. And the defence's own expert that we're going to read in a minute, we're going to read the expert's own words in a minute, agrees with me. Absolutely agrees with me and agrees with the state that Brian Kohberger is not severely affected by autism. He's not. He's really not. There you go. The term spectrum indicates that wide range of autistic symptoms and severity. Okay. All right. This is the big one. This is the one that I find really interesting. It looks huge, 33 pages, but we can skip loads of it because the bulk of these pages are actually the expert's CV. They've got a very impressive CV. I don't know this person at all, but let's assume that they're an expert. And actually, again, Ann Taylor appears to have shot herself in the foot because she's not as slick as she thinks she is. Because her own expert has stated that Brian Kohberger is not severely autistic. He's got some unusual elements on an MRI, which are concerning. He has mobility issues. No, he doesn't. I'm sorry. No, he doesn't. He's a runner. He's been running for fun for many years. He's a very fit guy. If he's got mobility issues, well, I'm sorry. You must be that deluded that you're going to believe that, what's that over there? Oh, it's a flying pig. He might be clumsy. There's a big difference between clumsiness or having, problems with fine motor coordination and being somebody with mobility issues. I'm sorry, having clumsiness or issues with fine motor skills does not give you problems with mobility, because there's a big difference between gross motor and fine motor disorders. Okay. No gross motor problems at all. He's been a long distance runner. Wasn't he an army cadet at one point? Didn't he want to join the police at one point? Wasn't he when he was a teenager? When he was like chubby? Wasn't he an army cadet? Nuh-uh. No, sorry. But Ann Taylor has completely given this case to the state. I'm going to go so far as she's tried so hard to counter every single possible thing that the state could come up with. And she's given Brian Kohberger to the state on a silver platter. That's how bad this is. That is how bad this is for Brian Kohberger now. Because they'll go along, they'll get their own psych eval, they'll go along, get their own health assessment, and they'll be very easily able to counter these claims that Ann Taylor is making. She should have just kept her mouth shut. No. You've done your client a huge disservice. 10 out of 10 for effort. But this is going to be a very different trial now, potentially, than it had been if they'd stuck to These are the murders. This is the evidence against Brian Kohberger. And you know, they hadn't tried to now bring in all these mitigating factors that make Kohberger look even more guilty than he was. She's made him look more guilty now than he ever was before. Hilarious. All right. So, responds. This is a response to the state's motion in limine regarding the neuropsychological and psychiatric evidence. Mr. Kohberger has filed several related motions that will be argued concurrently with this motion. So, this is all-encompassing. Like, they filed a bunch of motions, all kind of around the same issue, like a couple of weeks ago. So, they're combining them all now. All right, so we've got the motion to strike the death penalty for autism and the use of the term psychopath and sociopath, and also the conditions as an aggressor, as an aggravator. Okay, so filed on February 21st, the state objects to the proposed testimony of Rachel L. Orr, who is a psychologist, and Eileen Ryan, who is, what does that stand for? Presumably that's some kind of psychological person. Arguing that the proposed testimony is outside of the mental condition evidence allowable under Idaho Code 18207.3. So the state, as we've just seen, the state, in responding, like these motions that I've just gone through, they're responding to Ann Taylor saying that, you know, Brian Kohberger's autistic, he's got this big mental defect, and therefore they should strike the death penalty. That's where they started. It's now escalated. It's now escalated into something that is potentially a runaway train for Ann Taylor. It really is. Because now she's completely changing. She's completely now changing from, oh, he's mentally defective, to, well, he's got a brain problem. He's got a brain disorder. Like, his brain's too small. This is why I find this really interesting. We've now gone from mentally defective to, oh, well, he's got a physical problem. He's physically disabled because his brain's too small. Interesting. All right, let's read on. Let's read on. Okay. The minute that jury selection begins, jurors will begin to study and analyse Mr. Kohberger's physical presence. Of course they will. That's what juries do. They will watch his every move and pass judgment on him every minute of the jury trial, simply based on how he looks and reacts to the presence of certain evidence and comments about him. Okay, just like any other court case, just like any other trial, just like any other defendant, the jury will keep looking at the defendant to gauge their reactions. They absolutely will. But Ann Taylor, in her little genius brain, she's like, oh, all right, well, Brian Kohberger is gonna be really weird. He's got this creepy look about him. Let's explain that. Let's explain that. Okay, let's explain that. Okay. All right. Let's explain that. Mr. Kohberger must be able to present testimony to the jury that he has certain physical disorders. Quite right. Of course, let him do this. Let him do this, because it'll be hilarious. Because it hands, going down this line, hands Brian Kohberger to the state on a silver platter. Because none of this is impressive at all. It will assist the trier of fact to know his physical presentation, including non-verbal reactions in the courtroom, is explained by his physical condition. So not a mental condition, not a mental defect. No. See the change in wording. No mental defect now, not a mental defective. No. He's now got a physical condition. So very important change of wording. To exclude this evidence will result in unfair bias that could cause a wrongful conviction. This objection is supported by the declaration of Dr. Jeffrey Lewin, an expert in neuroscience and neuroimaging. So we're going to hear a lot from Dr. Lewin in a minute. Mr. Kohberger in no way suggests the expert testimony related to his autism spectrum disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and developmental coordination disorder, so clumsy, are for the purposes of showing that he does not know right from wrong. Good. I'm glad. So you can't say that he was insane at the time of the murders. Thank you. I'm glad we've got that cleared up in black and white. He has at all times and continues to assert his actual innocence in this case. Good for him. The state correctly notes in its motion, Mr. Kohberger's disclosure states that Dr. O's testimony and Dr. Ryan's testimony is not intended to be a mental element defense pursuant to Idaho Code 18207. Yeah, but they wanted to get the death penalty struck because he was mentally defective. Using the terms mental defective and autism all in the same sentence. Note the massive, like 180. We're moving away. We realize that mentally defective ain't going to help. Mentally defective ain't going to work. We know that the Idaho Supreme Court does not consider somebody mentally defective unless they've got a very serious intellectual disability. So she's got to change her mind now. Okay. Rather testimony about state of mind as well as factual defense testimony to anticipated testimony elicited by the state. Weird. Okay, so Idaho Code 18207 is not limited to the admission of either direct or rebuttal expert testimony to elements of the crime. Because of the state's broad application, the Idaho Supreme Court has determined that Idaho Code 18207 applies to legal proceedings before trial, including pre-trial motions. Good to know. All right. Okay, so we're going on about, because this is all about what witnesses are going to be allowed to speak on behalf of Brian Kohberger. So the state wants the psychologist and the health professionals dropped. But if Judge Hippler, this is how of a very sticky wicket Ann Taylor's created for Brian Kohberger here, because it's likely that Judge Hippler is going to allow the defense to call the psychologist, and then we've got this neuroscience person. It's likely that Judge Hippler is going to allow that testimony, or else, he's going to get accused of, I don't know, not allowing Brian Kohberger to defend himself. Rightly, I think Brian Kohberger should be allowed to bring these witnesses in, these expert witnesses in, because it'll be hilarious. Because they are so easy to counter, they're so easy to cross-examine, and the state will then bring in their own experts. And it becomes a very different trial, and one that is way more scathing towards Brian Kohberger than before. I'm loving it. Helena, welcome. Oh, you're a rejoin. Thank you for rejoining. Thank you so much. All right. Okay. So the threshold test for admissions of expert testimony is whether the scientific or other specialized knowledge of the expert will assist the trier of fact to understand the evidence. Okay. So if I was Judge Hippler, I would say, all right, these psychologists and this neuroscientist, they are experts. So I'd let them in. Okay. So in this case, it is not the normal experience and qualifications of lay jurors to understand ASD, OCD, and developmental coordination disorder, clumsiness. Expert testimony is necessary. I agree. So let's bring the experts in. Let's do that. Okay, so autism. The anticipated testimony of Dr. Orr and Dr. Ryan is relevant to explain that Mr. Kohberger's ASD diagnosis is a physical condition and how it presents in his demeanour. 2 weeks ago, you were calling him mentally defective because he had autism. So I'm glad she's changed her opinion on this. I'm glad, because this is correct. It is a physical condition. It's a neurodevelopmental issue. Okay. Mr. Kohberger has met the criteria for this diagnosis since childhood. And it's not a convenient diagnosis given his current legal situation and jeopardy. Glad to hear it. The anticipated testimony of Dr. Orr and Dr. Ryan is relevant to explaining how the behaviours and mannerisms presented by Mr. Kohberger are consistent with an individual having ASD. Not everybody with ASD. So she's learnt one lesson. Let's not call people with ASD mentally defective. But she's failed to grasp that ASD has got probably the broadest spectrum of any condition that I can think of. It's hugely broad. So you can't just say because he's got autism, he's going to look like this. Because he's got autism, he's going to, you know, behave like creepy town. No, that's ridiculous. In addition to the opinions of Dr. Orr and Dr. Ryan, the declaration of Dr. Lewin explains that neuroimaging of Mr. Kohberger's brain supports the ASD diagnosis. So Dr. Lewin has been poking around in Brian Kohberger's brain. I love it. I love it. So what have they had to do? Like MRI him. How did they do that? How did they do that? So they got him to a hospital, like in secret. Because you can't like use any metal or anything like that when you're in the MRI. So they'd have had to take his cuffs off. Oh, he's completely free to run riot in the hospital. All right. So I just have this, I have this vision of Brian Kohberger turning up at the hospital under the cover of darkness. How did they sneak him in with no one knowing? How interesting is that? Okay. So his brain supports the ASD diagnosis. ASD is a neurological disorder that is physical. Thank you. I'm glad we're no longer calling it a mental defect. Thank you. While most people ordinarily think of ASD as a mental health condition like you did, Anne, 2 weeks ago, it is a neurological and developmental disorder. We've got a couple of footnotes here. So several Idaho statutes list conditions that fall within the meaning of serious mental health illnesses. Okay. In Idaho, developmental disability has been defined as a chronic disability of an individual appears before the age of 22, which is attributable to impairments such as autism. Yeah, okay. Okay. Okay, that affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, and behave. According to the United States Government National Institute of Mental Health, autism spectrum disorder is a neurological and developmental disorder that affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, and behave. Repetitive, but moving on. As a neurological disorder, ASD is associated with structural and functional, i.e. physical, defects in the tissue. She loves that word. So we've got her away from mental defect. We're now going to say, oh, we've got structural defects now. We've got structural and functional defects. All right. Okay, cool. All right. That's better than saying you're mentally defective, I guess. That can't be seen when you look at a person. No, because you can't look inside the brain, can you? This is what I mean. She thinks she's cleverer than she actually is. She needs to get somebody else to read these motions and realise how stupid they sound. Is she actually writing all these herself, or does she get her minions to do it? I'm blaming everything on Ann Taylor. It might not even be Ann Taylor. But Ann Taylor's like the lead defence person, isn't she? So ultimately the book stops with her. It can't be observed with what, but it can be observed with proper microscopic examination, and in some individuals through the use of quantitative analysis of magnetic resonance imaging of the brain, such as the case with Mr. Kohberger. I've never seen autism diagnosed by the use of a microscope. The issue with autism, because it's such a large spectrum, it's also got many causes. So autistic spectrum disorder is actually a collection of symptoms. It's not about what causes it. It's a collection of symptoms. There's various causes. So you might have some chromosomal disorders that, you know, their symptoms look like autism. Various chromosomal syndromes. Numerous. So it tends to be that the chromosomal disorder gets diagnosed first, and then a diagnosis of autism follows, because a diagnosis of autism opens up a child to a lot of services that they might not get otherwise. Or you might get the autism diagnosis first, and then, you know, further examinations reveal that there's a chromosomal issue. However, the majority of people who are diagnosed with autism do not have any discernible or known chromosomal abnormality, or in Ann Taylor's words, defect. There's genetics. It's going to be genetics. It's all going to be genetics, but there's many different genes involved. So they've never pinned down like a cause, one cause, because there isn't one cause. There's many causes of the symptoms that encompass autistic spectrum disorder. So I've never seen it diagnosed under a microscope, though. All right. Research on large groups of persons with ASD has indicated the presence of structural differences in the brain of these groups versus those of individuals with typical neurobiological development. Again, the majority of people who are diagnosed with autism don't have like obvious differences in their brain. Then again, the majority of people with autism don't undergo MRI, because an MRI isn't necessary for the diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder. It's diagnosed on its symptoms. It's not diagnosed on looking through a microscope or even looking at someone's brain with an MRI. So maybe if every single person who was diagnosed with autism was given an MRI, maybe we would see a large proportion of those people with differences outside of the norm. Maybe we would. We don't know that, other than through, you know, some relatively small scale experiments, though, because microscopic or MRI technology is not necessary to get a diagnosis of autism, because it's a diagnosis of symptoms, based on symptoms. Okay. All right. Where are we? So it supports the conclusion of the national whatever and others that ASD is a neurological disorder, not a mental defect. Thank you, Anne. Imaging of Mr. Kohberger's brain, as reported by Dr. Lewin's attached declaration, shows findings of structural differences in the physical makeup of his brain in areas commonly associated with the control and expression of behaviours commonly seen in ASD and listed below, taken from the national whatever website, national health website. Symptoms of and actual behaviours commonly associated with obsessive compulsive disorder are common with people with ASD. They actually are quite common with people with ASD. As a physical condition, ASD may not be as noticeable as some physical conditions, like a missing arm. Yeah, I think you're more likely to be able to tell someone's got a missing arm. I think that's pretty obvious that someone has a missing arm. Okay, weird. If Mr. Kohberger had the physical disability of missing an arm, the jury would not require explanation about how such a physical condition might impact the case. Pretty sure you could still stab someone to death, though, with one arm. Pretty sure you could, if they were asleep. All right, ASD is visible in some ways and will be apparent to a jury, but will require explanation. Without explanation, the way that the public perceives the behaviours and mannerisms of someone with ASD is not always favourable and may be prejudicial. I agree. Let these experts speak. Let these experts speak. While Mr. Kohberger's presentation is highly consistent with ASD, without explanation, others may misinterpret and misidentify Mr. Kohberger's behaviours and cast them in a more sinister light. Well, this is pretty sinister, I have to say. 6 hours after the murders, you're like nice and relaxed in your shower with your dress shirt on, thumbing up the camera. That's a little bit sinister, honestly. Okay. So he doesn't show emotion on his face. He's got a flat affect, so flat emotions. He sits very still and holds his hands in the same position. And he has a piercing stare. He does. He really does. He does not show expected reactions. Well, what are expected reactions? Like, I don't even know what that means. Facial expressions do not reflect what he's feeling. He is stiff in body posture. He has prosody in speech, uses repetitive phrases and long words, has developmental dexterity problems. Many of his behavioral characteristics are known to be commonly associated with the presence of ASD and are clearly relevant to the interpretation of his behavior in the courtroom by the jury, and may also be relevant evidence regarding the rebuttal of evidence as to the commission of the crime itself. See, she's bringing this in. I told you 2 weeks ago. She's not bringing all this stuff in about autism just to get the death penalty struck in the punishment phase. The way she was wording it in the motions a couple of weeks ago, I knew she was going to bring this in, not just in the punishment phase, but in the guilt phase. And that would be an absolutely huge, monumental error, in my opinion. All right? A monumental error. However, it's right here. It's right here what she's planning. This is what she's planning. She's planning to explain the murderous behaviours away because he's got autism and he can't possibly have murdered 4 people because he's clumsy. Okay, all right. All right. So we'll skip this list because Dr. Lewin explains it better. So obsessive compulsive, so it can be an independent diagnosis, but is also a set of symptomatic behaviours that are often comorbid with ASD. That's true. Notable, okay, Mr. Kohberger has sleep difficulties and subsequently developed a habit of night driving or running to decompress. So in the very same motion, she is saying that Brian Kohberger has such massive problems with mobility that he couldn't possibly have done these murders. But yet here it is on page 6 that he's had a habit of running to decompress for years. For years. So he doesn't have mobility issues, problems with fine motor skills that make you like clumsy and like lack coordination. You know, you're probably not going to be very good as, you know, some, you know, like, I don't know, working to defuse bombs. That kind of job ain't going to be for you. All right. A surgeon probably also ain't going to be for you. You know, fine motor skills that you need to be really, really, really careful. No. Someone with, you know, problems that Brian Kohberger might have, those are not going to be jobs for you. However, it's completely different than your physical fitness and your ability to move your gross motor. Your gross motor function is going to be completely unaffected. And the fact that Brian Kohberger has been a runner for many years, absolutely. She has given the state Brian Kohberger on a silver platter. I bet they read this and they were laughing. I bet they were like, yeah, well, let this witness, Jeffrey Lewin, let him in, because this is going to be hilarious. Let him in. All right. He also engages in frequent compulsive hand washing, wears gloves to avoid germs, has a fear of things getting in his eyes, changes his shower curtain frequently to avoid exposure to mold. That's an interesting addition. Do you know what I think? And this, I have no evidence to back this up whatsoever, but watch this space. What if there was, you know, in his Amazon purchases, what if he'd been buying like several shower curtains? What if he's bought several shower curtains over, you know, a short space of time? That has to be explained, doesn't it? Now, the state has never mentioned Brian Kohberger buying multiple shower curtains, but the fact that she's included that makes me think that maybe somewhere in those Amazon purchases or other purchases, there is evidence that Brian Kohberger has been buying shower curtains. And she's had to explain that in some way. Now, it might well be that he buys multiple shower curtains because he obsesses about mold. That could be true. Or it could be that he used multiple shower curtains to cover his car and to wrap up the bloody clothes when he took them off. I've seen it on a movie. I can't remember. It was one of those mini series on Netflix where this killer, I can't remember what it was. I think it's a British one. It was pretty good. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, there was this killer, right? And she killed somebody. And then she had all of like the changes of clothes and stuff that she needed in a backpack. She went multiple ways all around everywhere, like to throw people off her scent and whatever. and she went into a toilet, and then she put a sheet on the floor, like could be a shower curtain, and then she took all her clothes off, took them all off, wrapped them all up, and disposed of them. What if Brian Kohberger, there's no evidence of blood in his car because he's cleaned it multiple times because, oh, look, he's got OCD, but also because he covered his vehicle in shower curtains? What if he also used a shower curtain, put a shower curtain on the floor, and then undressed and then wrapped everything up in a shower curtain, and then maybe, I don't know, disposed of it somewhere in the wilderness south of Moscow, because it took him over an hour to get home when it should have taken him 10 minutes. So he's gone and disposed of those items and the murder weapon. I think that's what he's done. I think there's a reason why shower curtain's been mentioned, because Ann Taylor isn't as slick as she likes to think she is. And I'm seeing this again and again and again with the defense motions, that something they put in proves to be relevant. So I look at all these little things now. I bet you any money they are nervous of the state bringing up the number of shower curtains that Brian Kohberger has bought, and they've got a way to explain it. He avoids anything he views as contaminating. I bet he loves jail. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? There'll be a motion to get Brian Kohberger moved to a germ-free environment. Can you imagine? I do actually feel sorry for him. Like, OCD is incredibly debilitating. Like, I'm not laughing at people with OCD. I'm not. I'm really not. It's debilitating. But imagine being in jail and being scared of germs and mold and smells, and imagine that. Oh dear. Now that, you could say, maybe a cruel and unusual punishment, but then again you might say, well, don't go murdering people then. All right, if the state elicits testimony at trial related to these types of facts, see, shower curtain. The state has never mentioned shower curtain. We've never seen any mention of shower curtain, have we? I'm telling you, there's a reason for this. All right. Mr. Kohberger, why did you buy 5 shower curtains off Amazon on November the 10th, 2022? I'm just making up stuff now. Well, because I've got OCD and because I have to change my shower curtain like every week to avoid contamination by mold. So it wasn't because you used the 5 shower curtains to cover your vehicle interior and to wrap up your bloody clothes. No. It's because I've got OCD and I'm scared of mold. Okay. All right. Mandy, member for 28 months. OG says hi from the southern tip of Africa. Hello, Mandy, from the southern tip of Africa. All right. Okay. He will refute that evidence through expert testimony as behaviours relating to his OCD. By way of specific example, the state continues to claim that Mr. Kohberger was wearing gloves on the night of his arrest. We know all this, don't we? Putting trash in baggies and stuff like that. Wearing gloves. No, he wasn't cleaning his car. He was cleaning his bathroom. So the fact that the cops claim to hear noises from the garage, well, is his bathroom in the garage, or were they just mistaken, or what? We don't know. But that's the reason. That's the real reason why, because you got OCD. All right. Okay. All right. So I think he should be allowed to explain his OCD and his behaviours and let the jury consider it. I absolutely agree that he should be allowed to bring those witnesses to explain to the jury why he was in gloves putting stuff in baggies in the middle of the night. All right, developmental coordination disorder. Mr. Kohberger suffers from deficits in fine motor dexterity and fine visual motor function. So nothing to do with gross motor skills, nothing to do with his mobility, doesn't stop him from running, being a runner for many years. Earlier on in this motion, one of the things that they explain that he does when he can't sleep is go running. So doesn't seem to have a problem. Doesn't have a problem, you know, coordinating his movements to drive. You know, if people with huge lacks of coordination can't drive because it requires coordination of your, you know, your limbs, you know, your arms, your legs, your eyes. You've got to coordinate all of that, haven't you? And be watching all sorts of stuff. He drove literally from one side of the United States to the other. That's what he did. And he only got stopped by the cops twice. So, look, I'm sorry. He's not got some kind of massive disability. The special needs killer, no. He's a special needs killer. Dear me. Dear me. All right. So the state has disclosed evidence that law enforcement will testify that they did test runs at 1122 King Road, and it's possible to commit 4 homicides in the time frame of only minutes, including walking to and from a car, removing clothing that will be covered in blood. So now Kohberger is that disabled that he can't take his own clothes off. Come on now. It's not like he needs like a personal assistant. He's living on his own. He's living on his own. He's not disabled in the way that she's trying to portray. And you can park your vehicle really close to the back of 1122 King Road. It like goes up like a hill. So past the front of the house, and it goes like round a bit and then up this hill, and you can park at the top of that hill there where those trees are, and it's right there, like Maddie's bedroom's right there, and the glass sliding doors are right there. So it's not like you've got a 3-mile hike to get back to your car, is it? It'd take like seconds to get out of that house and back to your car. And to say that he can't have done these murders because it required taking his clothes off. Come on now. Come on now. Additionally, the state has disclosed a forensic pathologist who will testify regarding manner of death, injuries, and specific wounds on the deceased. Mr. Kohberger has disclosed a forensic pathologist who has some differing opinions, including injury and specific wounds on the deceased. Great. Well, I don't care if one pathologist says, well, this person died of, you know, there's at least 12 different stab wounds, and then this pathologist said, oh no, there's only 8 different stab wounds. I don't care about those specifics. We know that 4 people were murdered by being stabbed by a large hunting knife. And we know that large hunting knife was a K-bar knife because the clown left the knife sheath at the scene complete with his DNA print on the snap of it. So we know what the weapon was. Let the pathologist quibble over the number of wounds, but that doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. All right. So Mr. Kohberger has a right to confront the witnesses. He absolutely does. Confront the witnesses and evidence presented by the state. Totally does. Let him in. Let him in. All right. So this is what really piqued my interest. This is the declaration of Jeffrey David Lewin. So he's PhD. He's not a medical doctor. Let me be clear. He's a neuroscientist, but he's not a medical doctor. Doesn't mean to say that he's not very highly educated. I'm sure he is. He certainly passes muster as an expert neuroscientist. So I say let this guy in. But let's be clear, he's not a pathologist. He's not a medic. He's an academic with his academic, his academic discipline is neuroscience. So highly educated though. So he has his own kind of service, got a PhD. So, all right. But he'll pass muster as an expert. So 30 plus years of experience in the neuroscientific evaluation of neurobiological status of clients with a wide range of conditions, including neurodevelopmental disorders, autism, ADD, ADHD, and reading disorders, epilepsy, traumatic brain injury, PTSD, and tinnitus. Oh, I've got tinnitus. I've had tinnitus since I was like born. I don't care, I quite like it. As outlined in my attached CV, Exhibit 1, I have co-authored more than 100 scientific articles and book chapters. So he's received a $10 million grant in funding from federal, state, and philanthropy, I can never say that word, sources. Okay, good. All right, declare him as an expert. I'm fine. I'm fine with this guy. Because he's not that helpful. Does Ann Taylor not realise this is not that helpful? Because this guy, under cross-examination, will be forced to agree that Mr. Kohberger's autism isn't severe, that his developmental coordination disorder also isn't severe. Probably the most severe, most kind of, I guess, debilitating issue that he has is his OCD. You know, when he was first arrested, and you know, people had come out speaking, you know, people who knew the family and stuff, you know, they talked about his OCD. We knew he had OCD right from the jump. That he would have to he had his own like plates and pots. Like he couldn't use plates, pots, cutlery that other people had used. He was that bad. So that's really quite debilitating. And his life in jail must be pretty uncomfortable. Must be pretty uncomfortable. But let's see what they say, what this guy says about Brian Kohberger. So I'm going to read from point 12 here. As an expert neuroscientist, I recognize 3 general categories of conditions that can impact a person's functional abilities and state of mind. Almost all conditions associated with psychological dysfunction have some neurobiological correlates that impart vulnerabilities, and in most instances, these are not immediate causative factors. For instance, or for an example, consider a person who experiences substantive depressive symptoms following a divorce. Unlike major depressive disorder, which has strong neurobiological underpinnings, the most likely appropriate diagnosis in this situation would be an adjustment disorder. Adjustment disorders can be associated with some biological dysregulation, but few would argue that adjustment disorder is not a mental condition. In contrast, some state of mind changes clearly reflect physical, biological factors. For example, ALS sometimes leads to mental health impairments, such as violence and disinhibition. These are most commonly a direct consequence of structural and functional disruption in frontal lobe brain circuits, as induced by the ALS. Here, the psychological disturbance should not be considered a mental condition. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that this guy is countering what Ann Taylor was wattling on about 2 weeks ago. All right. So there are some conditions in the grey area in the brain, I assume, with strong not grey matter, so grey area, like it's not black and white. Okay. With strong neurobiological and psychological underpinnings. For example, arachnophobia, fear of spiders, has both biological and psychological underpinnings. It is clearly triggered in relationship to external factors, but it reflects its abnormal biological response in the amygdala of the brain. Yeah, but it's a learned response. So, okay. All right, as outlined by Dr. Orr, Mr. Kohberger has multiple diagnostic conditions identified by qualified doctors. Remember, this guy is not a medic. Right? He's got a lot of education, he's got a lot of qualifications, he's got a lot of publications in a relevant area, but he's not a medic. It's PhD. Herein, I will discuss the subset of 3 conditions: autism spectrum disorder, developmental coordination disorder, and obsessive compulsive disorder, which are predominantly neurobiological rather than mental, thank you, in etiology and relevant to the guilt-innocent phase of the trial. See? You guys who came along 2 weeks ago saying, oh yeah, but Ann Taylor's only talking about ASD and his autism and all this stuff in case he gets convicted. It's like, no, well, read it. That might be one factor, but read what she's saying. She's actually implying very strongly she knows he's guilty because she's actually talking about the guilt phase. All right, so relevant to the guilt-innocent phase of the trial as argued by counsel. Thank you. Okay. So this is what Dr. Lewin has ascertained about Brian Kohberger. Autistic spectrum disorder level 1 without accompanying intellectual or language impairment. So on the mild end of the spectrum with no intellectual disability. So no, as far as what the Idaho Supreme Court says, he is absolutely eligible for the death penalty. Sorry, Brian, you're not intellectually disabled. You could have all the different neuroses or neurological stuff. You could have 20 different diagnoses of all different varieties, and you'd still be eligible for the death penalty. Sorry, Brian. All right, just thought about that. Okay, on one hand, his overall level of intellectual function and his general language skills have been adequate to allow him to complete a master's degree. He's just adequate. He's not special. He's just adequate. But neuropsychological evaluation reveals deficits in several subdomains, including motor skills, but fine motor skills. Right? He's not got a problem with his mobility, processing speed, and executive function. Oh, well, what might that mean? That might mean that you don't deal with problems properly. Like maybe that you fixate, maybe you get spurned, maybe you start stalking, maybe, I don't know, there's all sorts of things that could lead to. Perhaps most importantly, he demonstrates substantive impairments in social cognition to date back to early childhood. As noted by Dr. Orr, he demonstrates anomalies in nonverbal communication, poor integration of verbalizations and eye contact, limited use of descriptive gestures, restricted range of affect, so emotion, and atypical tone, poor social emotional reciprocity, his self-focused conversation, awkward interaction, limited perspective taking, limited sharing of affection or emotion, or affect emotion of others, and impaired relationships, superficial logical descriptions of relationships, poor insight in his role in relationships. So he's an incel. All of us who were saying he's an incel, he's an incel, he's an incel. All consistent with autistic patterns. Okay. Not everybody who's autistic, though, has got all of these issues. And some have got way more than these issues. Nobody's perfect. Paper Chaser, member for 29 months. You're absolutely right. No one is perfect. Whereas most patients with AC... with ASD demonstrate intellectual and language impairments. No, they don't. No, they don't. Most don't. It is well established that there is a significant minority of patients like Brian, where the dominant dysfunction is selectively seen with respect to social cognition. So, how you think in social settings. In part, this likely reflects the neurobiological reality of relatively distinct brain networks for language and social skills. Okay. Whereas there was a brief period of history where autism was thought to be a psychological response to environmental factors. Okay, so we know that it's now considered a physical issue, a neurological issue, not as a result of bad parenting or anything like that. All right, evidence that the ASDs are of neurodevelopmental and physical biological origin, not a mental condition, thank you, caused by external psychological factors or events, comes from several sources. Okay, so we've got some sources here. All right. These reasons, right. This is Brian. This is what this expert says has happened to Brian. For Brian specifically, there is objective evidence of disrupted brain structure in several nodes of the social network. Look, there isn't a social network center in your brain. I'm sorry. You might call it that, but there isn't a social network center in your brain, just so that you know. All right, as outlined in detail in Exhibit 3, which sadly we don't have, volumetric analysis of MRI data for Brian's brain reveals several brain areas to demonstrate volume within the lowest 10th percentile compared to all sex and age ranges plus or minus 5 years, matched neurotypical control. So there's certain areas of Brian's brain that are very small. In particular relevance is evidence of reduced volume for the left and right fusiform gyri, the left and right orbital frontal area. Do you know what happens when you get that little bit of your, it's like where your forehead is, right? That's your frontal lobe, right? The bottom of your frontal lobe that's that area, the orbital frontal area. So it's the bit in between, like right, like over the top of your eyes, that part. Do you know what happens if you get that part damaged? You become violent, impulsively aggressive. Just saying, do not ever let this guy out. He will do it again. I've been saying that, and I've been saying that, and I've been saying that. So please do not ever let this guy out. And now we've got MRI data to explain why. All right, the left temporal pole. Don't know whether he means the left temporal lobe, I'm not sure. And the right anterior cingulate area. All regions within the brain's social network. Stop calling it the brain's social network. Stop it. The fusiform, especially of the right, is especially important for the recognition and evaluation of emotional characteristics of faces. The orbital frontal cortex plays a key role in the emotional regulation of behavior. What happens? What happens, Dr. Lewin, what happens when someone gets upset who's got a disorder in that area? What happens? They kick off. They become violent. They become impulsively aggressive and can't stop themselves. The temporal pole, do you mean lobe or what? Plays a crucial role in social and emotional processing, especially with respect to the integration of complex perceptual inputs with visceral emotional responses. The anterior cingulate is critical for social decision-making and supports empathy, pro-social behavior, and processing information about others' motivations. So all these areas he's got really small, right? Really small in these areas. Now, here's the thing. What this guy is arguing is that these areas are small because Brian's autistic. Or these small areas are the cause of his dysfunction. Okay, that could be true. But correlation doesn't equal causation. It could well be that those areas have shrunk. It could well be that Brian's brain was born a normal size. But because he's autistic, because he struggles with social skills and stuff, those areas of the brain that are controlling those places, those things, have shrunk, which is actually the case in many disorders, like pregnancy. Not that pregnancy is a disorder, but did you know that when you're pregnant, there are areas of your brain that actually shrink as a result of the hormonal changes and stuff? But they build back up, don't worry. It's not like you can, like you're permanently scarred by pregnancy. Baby brain, there you go. So it doesn't necessarily mean that these areas are permanently this size. It doesn't mean that they've been this size since birth. It doesn't even mean that these areas of the brain are the reason why Brian is a murderous bastard. It's just interesting. I find this really interesting, especially knowing that he does appear to have a different, let's just call it a difference in this particular area of his brain. Let's do this on Google, because we know that Google is accepted as a you can be an expert. You can be an expert by Googling, can't you? All right, so here's Google. So the main function of the orbital frontal cortex: emotion, reward value, reward-related decision-making. Okay, what damage? Okay, here we go. So there you go. There it is. So that's your forehead. That'll be where your eyes are, right there. So it's that bit. Okay, it plays an important role in helping us interact and socialize with others. Damage to this region can cause behavioral changes that interfere with the ability to interact with other people. What are the symptoms? Okay. Orbitofrontal abnormalities have been implicated in many psychiatric symptoms such as pathological anxiety, depression, and impulsive aggression, as well as in the endocrine response to stress in human imaging studies. Interesting. Okay. All right. Okay. I find this hilarious. All right. This is hilarious. This is hilarious. So, developmental coordination disorder can co-occur with, but is distinct from, autism, also known as dyspraxia. DCD is characterized by impairments in the development of motor coordination, including dexterity, limb speed, gross and fine motor skills. However, Brian, his issue is with fine motor skills, not with gross motor. Like the ASD's dyspraxia has high irritability. Good for you. Okay. It's noteworthy that Brian continues to show evidence of significant motor and coordination issues as revealed through formal testing with Dr. Orr. Okay, so obsessive compulsive with absent insight. Dear me, this is hilarious. Brian, with his compulsive hand washing. Okay, we don't need the studies. In summary, based on my training experience, review of the scientific literature, and available data and reports on Mr. Kohberger, I believe that the conditions discussed above are of a clear neurobiological and physical etiology. Brian's developmental coordination disorder and autism spectrum disorder are specifically neurodevelopmental conditions with physical origins in his brain structure and function. His OCD also has primarily neuro-based structure, although it is modulated by psychological factors. Again, this is all really interesting. Like pandas is interesting. I love pandas. They're the cutest, cuddliest of big bears, but we're not talking about that kind of panda. We're talking about, in here, things like viral infections in childhood can cause OCD. So there's a lot of information in this that's not relevant. I'd like to have seen a little bit more on how this can be actually related to Brian. I'd like to have seen whether Dr. Lewin believes that Brian could not be capable of, taking his own clothes off after a murder. But I'm sure that if Judge Hippler allows this guy in to testify, I hope he does, that the cross-examination of Dr. Lewin and the other two, Dr. Orr and Dr. Ryan, are going to be extensive and are going to show that Brian actually is not severely affected by his autism. Yeah, he does have problems. I think we can all recognize that he's got problems because he's a murdering bastard. So, anybody who's a murdering bastard does have problems by definition. But the vast majority of people with autism don't go on to murder 4 people or murder anyone, do they? No. So autism is not the reason why Brian murdered 4 people. We don't know whether Brian's brain differences are as a result of his autism or as a cause of it, or are just completely unrelated. They are incidental findings. I do think there is a relationship. I do, because those areas where there's that, I don't know, loss of matter, the loss of size, are related to things like problems with executive function, problems with impulsivity, problems with aggression, problems with not being able to cope in a social world. All of those things do kind of coincide, do correlate with those particular brain areas. So it stands to reason that that correlation is a real one rather than one of just incidental. However, we don't know what causes what, because correlation does not equal causation. So we don't know whether it's the disorder that caused his brain to be small in those areas, i.e. that the brain shrunk as a result of those conditions, or that the brain was born like that, and that's what has caused the symptomology of these conditions. But one thing that Dr. Lewin does not explain, which I'd like to see fully explored under cross-examination, is how all of these things, which are common, autism is common, 1 in 60 odd people, OCD is surprisingly common, doesn't necessarily characterize itself as, putting your trash in baggies and wearing gloves and, wandering about in your boxer shorts in the middle of the night. There's many ways that obsessive compulsive disorders can manifest themselves. And then dyspraxia, well, that can be as minor as being a little bit clumsy, or it can be really debilitating. It really can be. If you've got really major problems with coordination, then you're not able to drive, you're not able to, walk upstairs, things like that. You're certainly not able to, there'll be lots of jobs that you can't do. But Brian doesn't appear to be severely affected by anything other than OCD. He does seem to be quite severely affected by OCD, but his autism is on the mild end, and his dyspraxia, whatever they're calling it these days, is also on the mild end. Because he's a fit guy, he's always run, he can drive a car from one side of the United States to the other, he can live on his own, he doesn't have any problems going upstairs. He lives on a, it wasn't a ground floor, first floor apartment, was it? Like, he had to go upstairs to go to his apartment. People with really severe dyspraxia can't do stairs. Or they can, but it's dangerous for them to do stairs. So this is not Brian, I'm afraid. So there's absolutely no reason why. Wasn't he a kickboxer too? Yeah, boxing, I think. Boxing or kickboxing. He was an army cadet, I think, when he was a teenager. So Ann Taylor, in summary, Ann Taylor has shot herself completely in the foot and landed Brian Kohberger on a silver platter to the state, in my opinion, because these experts let him in under cross-examination. These experts will have to agree that Brian's autism is relatively mild, that yes, his OCD will cause some issues. They'll probably get maybe some guards to explain how badly affected Brian is in jail. I don't know, maybe they will, maybe they won't. And his coordination problems, well, that's also on the mild end, because we know that Brian is perfectly functional member of society, doesn't need an assistant, doesn't need a carer, isn't disabled in any way, shape or form, living on his own, running his own life, PhD student, also teaching, driving a car. All of these things are he's just going about his normal life, until he decides to be a murdering bastard and kill 4 people while they are sleeping. That's the real issue. But Ann Taylor, carry on, son. Carry on, Ann. I'm loving it. I'm loving the way that you're giving this trial even more of an interest to me than it had in the beginning. No reason whatsoever why Brian... This stuff here puts Brian even more up my list of, you know, the culprit. Because he's got problems in his brain that coincide with problems with being impulsive, having problems with executive function, problems with empathy, problems with all sorts of things. So it makes sense. It all starts making sense. And I bet you he was buying multiple shower curtains so that he could keep the mold down in his apartment. Or was it the shower curtains were used to cover his car so that he didn't get blood or anything in his car, and he wrapped up his clothes in the shower curtain and then disposed of it somewhere? I don't know, maybe in the Snake River, maybe somewhere else. I think he put all the stuff in the Snake River. I do. That's why I think that's why he went south. And also he went right down to the Snake River the following afternoon. He went right the way down south to the Snake River because he was caught on a camera at a coffee shop right next to the Snake River. So I don't know why he went there. Maybe he went there to buy a coffee. Maybe he went there to make his driving a few hours before not seem unusual. Maybe he went there to, I don't know, throw some more stuff in the river. I don't know. Anyhow, I've been on here a long time. I haven't. I thought I'd been on here longer. I've actually only been on here 2 hours. But I am going to depart now. I'm going to leave you in peace. But definitely worth a look through these filings. Pretty interesting stuff. But the stuff that interests me is probably not the stuff that interests most people. Like the text messages, Dylan and Bethany. It's like, no, it's a nothing burger. Till we've got more information, that's a nothing burger. The stuff about where the white Elantra went is interesting. That's also interesting. But we knew approximately where it went anyway. It's interesting to have a lot more detail though on these things. So yeah, I don't know when the next court hearing is for this case. Does anybody know before I go? Does anybody know? Maybe you don't. All right, I'm going. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you so much. Okay, so we had Purple AJ gifting 5 memberships early on. Cassie Marie rejoined. We got Riley's nanny. We've got Kimberly and Joanne all donated. We got Helena, who also rejoined. That's it. And then we have Mandy and Paper Chaser, who've been a member for a long time, 28 months and 29 months respectively. Thank you all. Thanks, mods. And 9th of April. That sounds about right. Oh, I shall look forward to that. All right, guys. I'm out of here. See you soon.